Hi,
Hi.
today's guest is Shradha Bhatia. Shradha joins us from INSEAD, almost about to graduate a month away. Congratulations on just getting your offers.
Thank
We'll
you.
talk about this. Shradha went to St. Xavier's in Mumbai, graduated with a Bachelor's of Arts in Economics,
Hmm.
subsequently worked in brand strategy and brand management
Yeah.
for about 4 years before going into INSEAD.
Hmm.
Um, Thank you for doing this. I want to talk about the application journey, the uniqueness of INSEAD as a program itself, the mistakes
Hmm.
that you made, perhaps, or what you should have known so that other students can learn from it. So,
Yeah.
welcome,
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to share my insight and hopefully it can help other
other
prospective MBA
students.
candidates.
Let's talk about the motivations for the MBA itself. You graduated from St. Xavier's, you worked in brand management. I saw you got promoted in the 4 years. You got promoted fairly quickly, it looks
Yeah.
like, from a
Yeah.
junior brand strategist to a brand strategist.
Yeah.
Talk about what made you realize that you wanted to get an MBA,
Yeah.
and then we will go into why you selected a certain school or how you researched the about the schools.
Okay, sure. So I think in terms of why the MBA, I mean, I grew up in like a middle class Indian family, and I sort of had this idea that I wanted to do an MBA from a very young age. I think from my teenagers, but growing up, Harvard was like my dream school, and I
Okay.
think that that had a lot to do with my dad. And he was like, you should move to the U.S., go to Harvard, get your green card, blah blah blah, live the American dream. So I always sort of knew I wanted to do the MBA.
Okay.
Then when I started working, I started to think seriously about which schools that I wanted to go to. And just sort of speaking to people who had been to Harvard, doing a little bit more in depth research, I realized that the US really wasn't for me. Also, the idea of leaving the job market for 2 years was really, really daunting
Okay.
because I really enjoyed the work that I was doing. And I looked at the MBA sort of as, a quick journey of exploration, finesse your business skills, and then go back to work and start using that. So I think that was sort of the main motivation for doing the MBA. Another big motivation was international relocation.
Okay.
I had worked in Mumbai for 4 years. I really wanted to get some more international perspective and also try to move out of India and experience another market.
Okay.
So that was the second driver for the MBA.
How did you discover that the U.S. programs were not for you? Besides the limitation that most of the programs there are 2 years.
Yeah. So well, I started where anyone starts, which is really looking at the websites. And
Yeah.
I know a lot of schools sort of have the same things and have the same buzzwords, diversity, career
Yeah.
prospects, et cetera,
Yeah.
et cetera. But I think there's also a lot of really, really good MBA forums out there. So like
Mm-hmm.
GMAT Club, or even if you just use social media, try to find people on LinkedIn and really get an insider perspective
Mm-hmm.
um, into that. The other thing is, I was also thinking about where I wanted to live after the MBA, and the US just didn't
Wasn't
seem
for you.
very, yeah, it didn't seem very compelling. Professional reasons and personal reasons. I think personal reasons is very far away from home,
Yeah.
and I wanted to be close to my family and my friends. And professional reasons, at the time, I thought I wanted to stay in Asia because it was high growth.
Yeah.
So that's why I was looking for a school that had a campus in Asia. I'm not actually going to be staying in Asia after
That's
this
fair enough.
year, but that was my thinking at the time.
Let's talk about the research process that you went through. You said you looked at forums.
Yeah.
What else did you do in order to research all of the schools in
Mhm.
general and INSEAD in particular?
Mhm.
And how did you determine that okay, INSEAD was the practice? Did you speak to a lot of people? What did you learn about the school at that time?
Yeah. So to be honest, I don't think I did as much in-depth research as a lot of my classmates did.
Mm-hmm.
But it had been a very long process. So
Okay.
I was actually planning to apply for the MBA a year before I did.
Okay.
And then I decided to push it by a year because I was much younger than the average INSEAD student, and I was growing really quickly at work. So I wanted to keep that momentum going. But what I did was, look at the websites, interact with people on forums. When I decided that I was going to apply to INSEAD and LBS, I reached out to a lot of people on LinkedIn
Mm-hmm.
to really try and get their perspective on the culture, on the school, career prospects after that. So I think those are the main things.
Mm-hmm.
But to be honest, from the minute that I learned about INSEAD and I spoke to a couple of people who had gone there, I
Mm-hmm.
was I was very set on it. I think from a cultural, like a school culture point of view, and just the diversity, I got a really good feeling about the school. Um,
What
and
what was it? Is there anything you can point to that gave you that feeling?
I think it was the honestly, it's a really global school, and
Yep.
I know everyone says that on their website. If you go to any top MBA school, they all have their nationality statistics and all of that. But INSEAD is such a global school, not only in terms of, I think in terms of my class, we're about 90 or 100 different nationalities.
Yeah, it isn't
We
that
have
way in most other schools, particularly in the US. There is a
exactly,
33% representation of internationals, but not as diverse as
yeah.
INSEAD is.
INSEAD is incredibly diverse. There's three campuses. So you have one in Asia, you have one in Singapore, you have an Abu Dhabi campus, you have the
Hmm.
campus in France. So it really does give you this very international perspective. Even
Mm-hmm.
if you look at the faculty, you see that diversity in the faculty as well. It's not that because it's a French school, most of your faculty is French.
Hmm.
That's not true at all.
Hmm.
Everyone comes from all over the world, different walks of life. Some have been professors their whole life, some have worked in big companies and are now teaching. Um, so it really does live up to that. And the other thing is that I also applied to LBS, and
Yep.
I was in London for work, and I went to visit the LBS campus. And I don't mean to bash on any school or anything like that, but they did have this information session, so where current students would answer questions of prospective students. And I remember that in that session, they spoke a lot about placements in finance and
Mm-hmm.
banks and
Mm-hmm.
funds and all of that. And so one of the questions I asked was, can you tell me a little bit more about placements outside of that? For example, I'm a marketer. Do you
Mm-hmm.
have placements for marketing or, marketing agencies? And the response was something I will never forget, which is,
Which was?
I didn't know that you need an MBA to be a marketer.
Ooh. Okay.
Yeah.
It's not speaking very
Um,
highly of them. I can
yeah.
understand their point of view that
Yeah.
finance is the center of everything in London, particularly out of
Yes.
LBS. I get that,
Exactly.
but probably not the ideal response to attract a potential student.
Yeah, and I mean, I think in hindsight, I'm glad that I did get that response because I think going down the career path that I wanted to go down and that I am going down now, LBS wouldn't have made any sense for me at all.
You have a non-traditional background for an Indian,
Hmm.
right? As you can imagine, you were telling me the story offline that a
Yeah,
majority of your Indian classmates at INSEAD were from the traditional IT engineering backgrounds. You, on the other hand, had an economics education and a brand strategy
yeah.
experience. Let's talk about the application. How did you convey what you'd done and your uniqueness in the
Mm.
INSEAD application?
Yeah, so I think coming from a non-traditional background really, really helped. If you look at the profile of Indians at INSEAD, everyone has a very similar sort of education background and professional background. Even outside of the Indians, you have a lot of people who come from consulting and also from banking. So I think having a non-traditional background really helps. And what I did well in my application process was really, really play that up. And a school like INSEAD, I think, really appreciated that. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons that I was able to get through and get admitted is because I was able to communicate very clearly what made me different from
Hmm.
everyone else and the value that I would bring to the table, whether it was in class discussions or study group work, and just having that different perspective. And I think the other thing that really helped my applications, it's not something everyone is comfortable with, but I was very, very honest in my applications. I know there's a big temptation to use a lot of buzzwords and talk about how you're so hardworking and you're, intellectually and very, very bright and all of
Hmm.
that. But I was really, really honest, which I think,
What was an example of that? Can you talk us through what you'd said that was quite honest?
yeah, sure. So one of the questions was, to talk about your strengths and your weaknesses.
Okay.
And in terms of like my weaknesses, I spoke about how I have this inability to ask for help when I need it.
Hmm.
Because growing up and also the culture of the first company I worked at, kind of trained me to believe that asking for help is a sign of weakness
Hmm.
and makes you look like you're stupid and you don't know what you're doing. And it
Hmm.
took really shifting from that company to another company and being in a situation where I was so overwhelmed that I thought I was going to burn out.
Hmm.
And that's what it took for me to realize that, look, like, it's not a sign of stupidity. It doesn't make you any less of a
Mm-hmm.
person. And often it's just the smarter thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, that's an example of where I was really honest. Another example, one of the essay questions is about talking about your cultural experience. And I
Okay.
spoke a lot about, moving from Australia to India and that identity crisis sort of that I had, where you don't really fit in there, and then you come to India and you're kind of seen as a bit of a foreigner because you have an accent. So I was brutally honest, I think, in my essays. The other thing I did is I actually never showed my essays to anybody.
Ooh.
I showed it to one friend
Okay.
who I trusted a lot,
Okay.
to give me sort of very honest feedback. I
Yeah.
didn't show it to anyone else.
Yeah.
And I think the danger the danger with showing it to a lot of people is that everyone will always have
A
a
different
different point of
perspective.
view.
Yeah.
And if you keep trying to incorporate everyone's changes, you will lose the essence of what you're trying to say, and it's
Yeah.
not you. So
Yeah.
I think you have to be really confident and comfortable with what you want to say, and as long as it's true, and you write it in a compelling way, I think that's the most important thing.
I don't want to brush past the two very, very important things that you just said. In being able to showcase, most people showcase, especially the applications that I've seen, showcase a strength masked as a weakness. Oh,
Yeah,
I'm too
exactly.
hardworking as a
Yeah,
weakness, which
or I'm
is,
too much of a perfectionist.
yeah, it's so trite, and you can
Yeah,
see through it. Coming out honestly and actually telling the challenges that you face and how you
yeah,
overcame that, showing the turnaround story
yeah,
can actually become very relatable to a person reading it.
yeah,
Much like the experience of moving cultural or changing cultural barriers, because then that's something you can translate when saying the way I overcame that cultural change is
exactly.
exactly the same experience I will have when I come to business school and I'm equipped to
Yeah,
handle that. So
definitely.
it's extremely important to make these stories relatable and
Yeah,
make them completely unique and
yeah.
truthful.
And to be honest, I apply the same thing to job interviews now as well.
Yeah,
They always ask you, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses?
yeah,
And I think one thing I've realized is if you take a similar approach to answering that weakness question,
yeah,
people actually appreciate it. And as
yeah,
long as you can show that you recognize your weakness and you've done something about it,
yeah.
I think people really appreciate people that are honest.
Yeah, it shows an incredible amount of self-awareness, which is in short
Yeah,
supply most of the time.
yeah.
Um, Excellent. Let's talk about the selection of INSEAD as a school. You
Mm,
told me off air that yours was a 10-month program.
yes.
Now, you've also told me that there are three different campuses that you can go to, and there's also an
Yes.
18-month program for those who choose to do an internship.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody applying to INSEAD get to choose between each of these, and how did you make that choice?
Right. So how it works is when you're doing your, okay, so we'll talk about campus and
Mm-hmm.
then, no, we'll talk about which program you choose and then we'll talk about campus.
Sure.
So when you are applying,
Mm-hmm.
you need to decide which class you want to apply for. And if you apply for the July class,
Mm-hmm.
which is my class, then you will have a 10-month program. You don't have a summer break and you don't get the opportunity to intern. If
Mm-hmm.
you apply for the December class, then you have the summer break,
Mm-hmm.
where you have a 2-month window where you can intern or travel or volunteer, do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a choice that you have to make before you apply. The December class is a lot more competitive, because a lot of people who come in are trying to change geography and change careers. And if you intern, it's a good way to get a job because you can convert it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a choice that you make. In
Mm-hmm.
hindsight, I think that if I could do it again, that would be the only thing I would
Choice
do
you would make.
differently. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
is to have that opportunity to intern. So that's one.
Mm-hmm.
I would also say that a lot of people apply for the July class and then try to defer it by
Ah.
6 months. The school doesn't look very favorably on that.
Mm.
So unless you have some sort of extreme circumstances and you can actually justify it, they usually don't let you
Allow
defer.
that. Mm.
Yeah. And then in terms of campus, how it works is when you do your online application, you
Mm-hmm.
choose which campus you would like to start in.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that's Singapore or France.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, that choice, most people make it on the basis of weather, because you don't want to be in a tiny French village when it's like -5 degrees.
Mm.
And then when you come into school, we have a bidding process.
Okay.
So the academic year is divided into 5 periods, and you're allocated a certain number of points, and you can
Mm-hmm.
use that to bid on which campus you want to be on for each of
Interesting.
those periods. And then we also have an Abu Dhabi campus, which is mainly used for executive programs, but you
Understood.
can do one period over there as well. And then
Okay.
there's an exchange with Wharton. There's also an exchange with Kellogg. So it's the same process. You sort of use your points to bid on what you want.
So anybody in, whether it's the July program or the December program, coming into any campus can choose those bidding points to rotate again in other
Yeah.
campuses or the exchange programs as well.
Yeah, and what a
That's
lot
quite
of people
flexible.
do is because what they say is you should try to end up where you want to work.
Hmm.
So if you want to work in Asia, be in Singapore for the last two periods, and vice versa for Europe. So a
Hmm.
lot of people will start in the other campus and then move to their home campus when recruitment starts, which is sort
Hmm.
of the fourth and fifth period.
By the before we go into the actual 10-month MBA experience
hmm
itself, who would be the ideal candidate to pursue a 10-month program as opposed to the 18-month one? Um,
I think. Okay, well, the 10-month program, first of all, is very popular for sponsored students.
hmm.
We have a lot of people who are coming in from consulting firms. They're sponsored by their company and they're going to go back. So for them, it's sort of one big party year, and
Hmm.
they tend to choose the July program. The second thing I would say is that if you have a relatively conventional background, it may be easier for you to get into the July program because demand is a little bit less.
Hmm.
But I feel like for people who are trying to change careers,
Hmm.
especially industries, the 12-month program with the internship is the best way to do that. If
Understood.
you get an internship, if you do well, you will convert it and you will have a job, 4 months before graduation, which is great.
Yeah. Okay. That makes
Yeah.
sense. Let's talk about getting into the MBA program itself.
hmm
You got into INSEAD. You told me that there were certain things that you wish you knew or that you were better prepared. Uh,
Yeah.
talk me through those experiences so that everybody else can learn from it.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things actually that I wish that I knew. The first thing I guess I want to talk about is age.
Hmm.
So I was 25 when I started, and I
Hmm.
just turned 26. The average age for an INSEAD student is about 27 to 28.
Hmm.
And you have a lot of people who are, in their early 30s as well. So
Right.
I'm one of the youngest people here. And I think it's very common with Indians to sort of try to get your MBA out of the
As
way
early
as
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 possible.
soon as
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
I would say though that I feel like the older you are and the more experience you have, the more value the MBA also adds to you.
Yeah.
So that's something to think about when you're deciding when to go. I know it's very tempting to get a head start. You graduate early, you have a good job by the time you're 26. But I think if you have a couple more years of work experience, it definitely benefits you more.
Hmm.
Having said that, I had a great time, managed to find a job, so no regrets now.
Hmm.
Um, but it is something I was thinking about also getting into the MBAs. Did I make the right decision? Did I do it too early?
Hmm.
So that would be one. Um, the second thing I would say is that a lot of people who come into the MBA are very used to being, the smartest people in the room, in their previous jobs and previous schools,
Hmm.
and they're very ambitious people, very intelligent people. And then you come to INSEAD and you're surrounded by 500 people who are equally and like much more intelligent, and that can
Intelligent, competitive, type A
competitive
personalities who want to
everything
be the best at
exactly.
everything they do. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that process, I think, can definitely take a bit of a toll on your confidence, especially in the beginning. So, for example, although I studied economics, I never used it in work, and so I was very out
Nobody
of touch.
does.
Exactly. So I was very out of touch with like statistics and corporate finance and accounting, and then I came in, and all my core classes were all finance and operations.
Yeah.
And I didn't even use Excel in my day-to-day job in branding.
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna lie, like the first 2 weeks, I did feel very, very out of my depth.
Yeah.
There are going to be moments where you feel like a complete idiot because you can't understand what the professor's talking about. Everyone around you, understands it and has things to say about it.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of the learning process.
Yeah.
And I think you sort of learn to get over that very quickly. And it ends up being a huge humbling experience, because you realize that you're not always going to be the smartest person, and you're not always going to know everything, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell you an interesting story. When I went into Ross during the first term, I was so overwhelmed because recruiting begins week two.
Yeah.
Companies start coming on campus, and I was undecided as to what I wanted to do. That the either the social or the academic started to take a hit.
Yeah.
And in my core finance classes, I had to let my friends take most of the workload. And it was
Yeah.
so demoralizing because I was just trying to come out from under the pressure of figuring out what I wanted to do,
Yeah.
that I just prayed that I wish somebody told me it's going to be like this so that I could have been better prepared.
Yeah.
Talk about recruiting. I assume, as with many MBA programs, recruiting is one of the biggest emphasis when you
Yeah.
get into the program itself. Talk about recruiting at INSEAD, how difficult, how easy it is from your awareness of the Singapore campus, but also elsewhere.
Yeah. So the Singapore and France campus, the good thing is that they're set up very similarly.
Hmm.
And what they try to do is to make sure that they have the same activities going on both campuses at the same time. So there's
Hmm.
no sort of, no one's missing out on anything. And yeah, they start recruitment from day one. So we have sort of a career elective, which is part of the core, where they're talking you through how to network, how to reach out to alumni, how to speak to them, preparing your pitch, your stories, your list of recruiters that you want to target, and you really go through that. I think the mistake a lot of people do is that when you come in, recruitment seems so far away that people don't really pay attention to it.
Yeah.
And so you don't really think about it for the first, 4 months. And then suddenly recruitment is here and you don't have anything ready.
Right.
So I think that's a big lesson. And I think, one of the things I learned was that you have to start networking from day one.
Hmm.
And I wish it's something I had done more,
Hmm.
because it's hugely, hugely effective.
Hmm.
If you can sort of reach out to people in companies and get them to like you when it comes time to apply, people will really champion and push for you. And that's how I actually got one of my offers as well.
Hmm.
So I think, it comes down to this balancing act, because you have to balance academics, your social life, and recruitment. But at the end of the day, you're here to make that career change, and that's most important. The other thing is that we have a very good career center here. So we have people who are in charge of every industry,
Hmm.
and they sort of liaise with the companies and figure out what's going on, which offices are recruiting, which are not. We also have a career coach who you start communicating with before you even come to INSEAD. So that's really helpful. There are a huge number of resources available. It just comes down to whether you take advantage of them or not. Your career coach will do mock interviews with you. You have CV reviews constantly. There are people you can practice your pitch with. So you have to take advantage of it. Though people aren't going to come and drop an interview in your lap.
None of
Uh,
it is, yeah.
yeah.
Uh, is there any overlap with your MBA seniors in your program, or there is? I assume
Yeah.
it's a very thin or a small period, right?
Yeah, so there's a few months. I think it's about 4 months where you overlap with your seniors. And what's really cool about that is that when you come in as an MBA, your seniors are starting their recruitment. So
Mm.
a lot of the companies are coming into campus for presentations at that time, and you
Hmm.
can actually go and sit in for those presentations, even though you're not allowed to recruit.
Oh,
And start networking with people, start speaking to people. So again, that's something you can do to get a head start.
it's very interesting. In the US, at least at Ross, the trend was a little different. We, of course, have a
Hmm.
whole year of overlap. Uh, when you begin school, like you said, the MBA twos are already starting to
Yeah,
recruit. It would be heavily frowned upon if an MBA one went in and sat in on those presentations.
really.
Yes, the clubs would take notice, the folks, the MBA seniors would take notice that, okay, this guy is coming in when our folks need to get recruited. So please hold your horses and
Yeah,
then we'll help you once we're done with recruiting.
yeah,
And when your recruiting begins, we'll lay out a platform for you to
yeah,
help you, but don't burn your bridges before that. But it's interesting that INSEAD
yeah,
offers that opportunity where you can go and at
yeah,
least take a look at what the companies are presenting.
yeah. So I mean, of course, you can't recruit then. You can go for the
Yeah.
presentations, but obviously you're not allowed to be there for the networking events, and you're
Okay,
not allowed to
perfect.
apply and
Yeah.
all of that. So
You mentioned something at the start of the interview where we were speaking about INSEAD and its culture of recruiting for consulting quite a bit,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
Consulting is a big placement
yeah,
option. I know at McKinsey, INSEAD was one of the biggest feeder schools into our associate program.
yeah,
You, on the other hand, were trying to recruit for something still within the brand space and the marketing space.
yeah, yeah,
You spoke briefly about networking and the importance of it.
yeah,
What did you do tactically in order to network and get a job where it
yeah.
wasn't a core focus of the school?
So I did a few things. The first was that I really heavily took advantage of every resource that I had access to. And so in my first period at INSEAD, we call it a URL, it's a unique recruiter list, which are
Okay.
the companies that you want to target. And that's divided into like 4 sections. So dream companies, trendy companies, the companies that come to campus, et cetera, et cetera. So I had that list in place. And then we have a very strong alum network.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something you should really, really use. I think people can be scared to reach out, but there's obviously a way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just email someone and be like, hey, can you get me this job?
Yeah.
But if you sort of start to build that relationship, and that's what I did. I used the directory. I looked for people who were in the companies that I wanted to work at. Also looked for people with similar profiles to me.
Yeah.
And just met up with them, did calls, really tried to get a sense of the company, how they recruit, what are they looking for, what are some of the challenges I would face going into that, and really kept those relationships going. Um, Also, I was a bit pushy
Mm-hmm.
towards the end of it,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it doesn't hurt, especially as an Indian, you
Mm-hmm.
obviously have a big practical issue, which is work authorization.
That's right.
And if you're doing consulting, it's a bit easier because companies will take care of that. Having
Yeah.
said that, there are still a lot of offices you can't apply to because of language barriers and all of that.
Yeah.
But there were, definitely a couple of situations where I was initially told that, look, like we're only looking for European candidates or people with work authorization. And
Yeah.
these were jobs where I had the perfect experience and everything. And so I was a bit pushy and I was like, look, I understand that. I know that, there's a huge financial cost to sponsoring but just look at my CV and, let's talk.
Yeah.
And I think it doesn't hurt to be pushy. I think sometimes people appreciate it as long as you do it in the right way.
Yeah. Let's not run past these couple of points that you mentioned. I
Yeah,
think persevering is very, very important.
definitely.
Actually trying to close, saying, hey, just have a phone call with me. Here's why. You just have a phone call with me
Hmm.
is extremely important. And at some point, everybody needs to do it. They can't be
Yeah,
just an arm's length in terms of recruiting. You have to network and you have to try and push for closing it, but not
yeah,
make it very tactical or
yeah,
transactional. And in that sense, you said something very important. That is, make sure that you start your networking way before you actually
yeah,
need the job, so that
yeah,
at the point when you need the job, if you built a good rapport with somebody, they'll actually champion your cause and tell you, hey, why don't
definitely.
you apply for a role like this? I think you'll be a great fit for our company.
Yeah,
Um, Also, another thing which you utilize really well is maintain the networks at the company you worked before you got into your MBA.
yeah, yeah,
Ensure you nurture that. Don't assume that, oh, I'm tired of this company, I'm sick of it, now I'm going for my MBA, thank God, and just abandon
yeah.
the relationships. Keep that going.
Yeah, definitely keep it going. And I think if you had good relationships in your old company, you don't realize how much people are ready to help you.
Yeah.
And so, I have an offer from my old company, but my boss also got me interviews at other companies.
Yeah.
And that was purely because we had a great working relationship. So I
Yeah.
think, maintaining that network is really important. And I think sometimes what people do is week 2 of INSEAD, they're really excited about networking. They send all these emails, have all these conversations, and then there's radio silence for 4 months,
Yeah.
and you don't stay in touch. And then it comes time to recruit, and those people you spoke to don't really remember you.
No.
You haven't really made an effort to stay in touch with them. So
Yeah.
just keeping those relationships going, I think, is really, really important.
Yeah. No, this is great. I want to close out with one thing, an understanding of the culture at INSEAD. Can
Yeah.
you give me a couple of concrete examples as to what the culture at INSEAD is like?
Yeah. So, first of all, like I said, really international. I think there's about 90 or 100 different nationalities in my class. Also, I would say very diverse in terms of age. So you have people, as young as me, and then I have people who are like 34, 35. While we do have a lot of students who come from consulting, it's a very open school. So I had someone in my study group who was an architect. I had someone, who was a data scientist. I had someone who was a chemist. So you have a lot of diversity, and I think the school really values that. I would say that because of that, INSEAD is a very sort of inclusive place. And I don't mean that, I know, again, it's another buzzword, but it's really true. And I think the biggest example I can give you of that is during recruitment. So you would imagine that recruitment would be sort of really cutthroat and really competitive, and, people are not sharing information and all of that. It's the exact opposite. People are, practicing cases with each other. People are helping each other get interviews, even if you're going for the same job. People are, more than happy to share information and really, really happy when you get somewhere or you get something. And at the same time, when you have classmates who recruitment isn't going as well for them, it kind of impacts everyone. Also, because you spend so much time with these people that you become really, really close.
Become invested in the other person's success as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's very inclusive. It's definitely not a place where, if the other thing you won't see is, okay, there's a lot of Indians and there's a lot of Asians, but you will never see that Indians only hang out with Indians or Asians only hang out with Asians. It's not like that at all. So I think that's one of the biggest characteristics of the school. The other one is it's a very social, very, very, very social. So I had a couple of friends visiting from Wharton, and even they remarked that it's way more social than a lot of the US schools. There's always something going on. Whether it's a party, it's a national week. We travel a lot. So, I have friends who have not been in Singapore a single weekend because they've traveled every single weekend.
Oh, dear.
And it's really fun because
very expensive also.
Very expensive, but you're in Asia, flight tickets are cheap.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very social school as well. And I think you need to be a social person to have fun here. I feel like if you're not a very social person, you will grow into it. You won't have much of an option. People will make you social. But it's really fun. And then in Singapore, everyone lives in 2 apartment buildings, so you're kind of always around each other, and it's very family-like.
All students live in those apartment buildings?
Yeah, most of us, like 80% of us, live in 2 apartment buildings that are 5 minutes away from school.
That's unbelievable. Yeah. That's really good.
It's super cool. So there's always like a party at someone's house or a barbecue, or it's just very, very social. You won't see a lot of small groups. Everyone kind of knows everyone. So
wow,
it's very fluid.
Okay, I can see the advantage to that for sure. Yeah. That's incredible. Is there anything in terms of final advice that you have for Indian applicants trying to apply to any school, in particular INSEAD, that you'd like to share? Anything that I did not cover?
Yeah, well, I think a couple of things. One is more practical advice, which is that every school has these sort of unsaid nationality quotas. And it's the truth. They'll never put on their website. Yeah, but it's
so true. Yeah.
So in my experience, if you're an Indian or you come from another country with that kind of, which is a large population,
overrepresented.
I think, yeah, definitely do round 1 or round 2. But I think round 1 is much easier, especially if Indian male, similar professional background. Round 1 or round 2 always help. The GMAT. So the GMAT, obviously is not a deal breaker if you don't have an amazing score, but I would say that it helps you get your foot in the door. So if you have a great GMAT score, that's one less thing you have to worry about in your application. And if you don't have that good of a GMAT score, then you have to try a bit harder, and overcompensate in your essays and other things. And then the last thing I would say is start preparing in advance. So I started writing my application essays like 2 months before they were due. Really take your time with it. Think about what makes you different, especially if you're going to a school like INSEAD. They value that. and be just be honest. I
Yeah.
know it's hard sometimes, and it's very tempting to, amplify stories and facts and
Yeah.
make yourself sound really good, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Um, but people can definitely tell when you're
You
lying
can see
to your
through it.
face.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even in your admissions interviews, even in job interviews, people always know when you're lying. So, yeah, I think that would be my advice. And then in terms of schools, I think do a lot of research about the culture of the school.
Yeah.
Um, what are the biggest industries that recruit? Where do they recruit? So, for example, if you want to work in America, don't come to INSEAD.
Mm.
Go to an American school.
Mm.
If you want to recruit in India, know
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of Indian offices don't recruit from INSEAD. So you
Mm.
may be better off going to a top Indian school.
Mm.
So I'd say think really, really hard about all of that and then choose your school accordingly.
Mm. It's great advice. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. I hope
No worries.
everybody makes good use of this opportunity and listens to this interview. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for doing it.
No
Thanks for
worries. I
coming
hope
on.
it was helpful.